This is one of Hikaru Nakamura's best games ever, and don't take my word for it. Here's Hikaru talking about this game.
Probably, I would say my greatest game that I've ever played.
So clearly it's a pretty good game, so let's go ahead and dive into it. So he has the black pieces and he's playing against Boris Gelfand with the white ones. It was a game played in 2010. Let's begin. So d4, knight to f6, c4, now g6, knight develops to c3, and here black already has their first major decision to make. Are you going to play the Grunfeld with d5 and go for a more aggressive center from the opening, or play a more passive setup, the King's Indian, and look to strike later on? And that's exactly what Hikaru chose. Bishop to g7, d6 is played. So here, knight to f3, black castles. Typically just bishop to e2 is played here, developing, getting ready to castle, and now e5. And if you've never played the King's Indian, maybe this seems a bit strange for you. It seems like you're just losing a pawn, but you're not actually losing a pawn, because if white takes the extra pawn, your idea is to unleash this bishop with knight takes e4, and after takes, you've won your pawn back. I mean, you could actually even here, after they take, you can decide to first trade the queens off and then go for this. And the point is, you have won your pawn back, your bishop is very beautiful, and you have some very nice development for all of your pieces. That is why typically white doesn't go for this seemingly free pawn, and instead in this position white simply castled. Now knight to c6 is played, developing a piece, and the move d5. The knight has to move to e7, and the point now kind of, it becomes clear what's going to happen. White has some extra space on the queen side, and white is going to aim to launch a queenside attack. And while white is doing that, black is clearly going to push this f5 pawn, try to open up this rook, open up some of these diagonals, and eventually get the queen over here and go for a kingside attack. And this is how the game became so beautiful. Both players attacking on opposite sides of the board. It becomes a very sharp and aggressive game. So here, the move knight to d2 was played, and the point is, eventually, once these pawns start launching, the knight can move over to c4 and be a good queenside attacking piece. So now knight to e8, and like I said, f5 is kind of the goal here. Open up this rook, give it a bit more space, and once the pawn reaches f5, then you can bring back your knight to the king side and put your knight under your pawn. So here, the move b4, again going for that queenside attack, and now f5 and c5. So both players doing exactly what they should be doing, going for this crazy attack on both sides of the board. And now knight to f6, bringing back this knight to the king side, and you need this knight here because otherwise your attack won't be as powerful. So here the move f3 was played, and it seems like maybe this king becomes a bit more weak along this diagonal, but it's very hard to actually use this diagonal. And eventually, maybe this bishop could land here if it becomes important. The bishop could try to take this diagonal. So really, it's not weakening the king too much. And the point is, it's trying to say that after takes, white is getting a very powerful file here. And therefore, white is going to still have this nice attack here on the queen side, but your attack on the king side is going to be a lot harder to actually go ahead and orchestrate. So that's the idea for white, which is why instead of taking, Hikaru played the move f4, locking up the position, saying, this rook, it's not going to be able to be open on this file, and instead I'm going to now have more space on the king side, because it's very clear that black has a bit more space in this king side of the board, and my pieces are going to be able to attack, with my pawns, I'm going to be able to launch an attack. This bishop is going to be a very key piece because of all these pawns on dark squares. This bishop, even though it might not seem like it's doing much, it will, in this game, actually become a very major piece, as you will see. So in the game, knight to c4 was played, and now the move g5, and now a4. Knight to g6, eventually your plan is to maybe get the queen over, so you have a lot of pieces blocking that, so it's good to move your knight into a better kingside position, and also to maybe free up this diagonal a little bit more. And now the move bishop to a3. And even though it might not seem like there's something immediate about this attack on the rook, it's just not pleasant to play with a bishop aimed towards one of your pieces, so the simple rook to f7 was played here. It also achieves other things. For example, the bishop can now come to f8 and kind of try to, I guess, match this diagonal with the bishop that white has. and also maintain some more queenside defensive pieces. Also, the rook here is kind of nice on this 7th rank, patrolling over all of these pawns here. So from this position, the move b5 was played, and now black took. It might seem a bit weird to take, you're breaking up your pawn structure, but it was pretty important to take here because if you maybe decided to defend the piece and you tried to play a bit more passively, then the point is you're simply allowing white to run you over with these pawns. You have to somehow diffuse all of these pawns that are very, very close to promoting, very, very close. So you want to take here, and after the bishop takes, it will take white a little longer to form an attack. They have a little bit of less pawns, and the bishop isn't necessarily in an ideal space. So here the move h5 was played. And now the move a5, again, you want to lead with your pawns. You can't really do anything with this bishop, so you need your pawns to start the attack. So the move a5 was played, and now g4. Ignoring white's attack, Hikaru going straight for the counterattack. So from this position, b6 was played, and here the move g3, ignoring the threat. Because if you take, then you're kind of giving in, and you're starting to deal with this queen side, and you're forgetting about your attack on the king side. So you have to, unless it is completely necessary, you definitely want to try to attack as much as you can. So g3 might seem a bit weird. It might seem like you're locking in the position after h3. But this bishop, like I said, it can become a hero. So bishop takes h3 is actually very much possible with the idea queen to c8. And how are you going to defend this pawn? You're definitely not going to do it with your king because my knight will kick that piece out. And once the queen infiltrates, it's going to be checkmate, or you're going to win a lot of material. So that is why you can't really take the bishop, so you can't really push h3. So after the move g3, the move king to h1 was played. And it might seem like the king is kind of running into an attack, but that's actually not the case. If you try to take the pawn here, the king won't take and open up himself. Instead, the king is simply going to stay here, use this pawn as a shield, and then focus on this queenside attack. And it's kind of annoying here for black because you can't continue to attack that easily. And if you alternatively try to maybe use your other pawn and try to break open the position, well, then h3 becomes a bit more possible because after takes, queen to c8, king to g2, there's no knight to h4, which would have attacked the king last time. And instead, you can't really get another piece, you can't get your queen into the attack, and you're basically losing. So going backwards, instead of any of these two moves, after king to h1 was played, Hikaru played bishop to f8, again getting this bishop onto this nicer diagonal, especially in an attack where black formed this pawn chain. This bishop typically doesn't get out on this diagonal that easily, so rerouting it to f8 is a pretty nice idea. It also, notice, frees up this g7 square for the rook, which could allow the rook to control the g file if need be in the future. So here the move d6 was played, and this is a mistake. And the reason that this is a mistake is not that easy to see, because it seems like white has a whole lot of pieces controlling this square. And that is true. And if you take, then that would be a mistake by you. This could happen in the future. And in general, I mean, white has just a ton of pieces on the queen side, and they're very advanced as well. And so what you can do instead, though, to punish this is notice that this queen is a pretty important piece. It's defending this pawn. If it were ever to move, that would not be so good. So the move a takes on b6 is possible. And if they take with the pawn, rook takes on a1, dragging the queen away, and you win a pawn in the end. And that is why it was a mistake. So Hikaru punishes Boris here very nicely with a takes b6. And now you can't really take, like I showed, it doesn't end up well for you. So the move bishop to g1 was played. And the point is, the bishop, it has no better place to go. It might as well go into a very nice defensive post. And if it tried to maybe go to here, for example, and maybe stay on the queen side, the issue is then it was needed as a defensive post. Because, for example, knight takes e4, I think, is possible. With this idea, and, you know, h3, again, this bishop being a hero can take, and mate will come. So it is important as white in a position like this where black clearly has some nice plans to attack. It's important to position your pieces on good defensive squares. So bishop to g1 was played. Hikaru now played knight to h4. And the idea of this move is to take on g2. And we'll look at this in a second. But First, it is important to mention that this was apparently an inaccuracy by the computer. And the computer states that after h takes g3, f takes g3, and bishop to e3, white is completely happy here and white is surviving. It seems very scary to play this as white as a human because of, for example, bishop h3 and, there's all sorts of attacks here. But apparently, rook to g1 just holds everything together and white is actually better here. And it's crazy because you're opening up your king with this move h takes g3, but that is the move to punish this knight h4. But Boris does not find this, and understandably so. It seems very dangerous to open up the king like this, and instead plays rook to e1. Now knight takes g2 is played, and here's the idea. After king takes g2, you're not going to checkmate your opponent in 7 moves. It's not like Hikaru calculated this very nice checkmate in a couple of moves. And that is really the beauty of this. Hikaru didn't see a direct plan to win this game. Instead, he just realized that the king being here cannot be good. And his plan was to play, for example, rook to g7, getting the rook on a better position, eventually planning to move out this bishop and get the queen in somehow through this diagonal, for example, or move this knight, get the queen through here. And his idea, or perhaps actually just push this pawn even and break through with the pawns. But the point that I'm trying to make is that he didn't have a direct checkmating attack or a direct attack that wins a lot of material. Instead, he just realized that this position has to be winning. And that is such a beautiful concept that it wasn't so concrete. Instead, he just knew that this was just a great position. So, for example, there's knight takes e5 here, bishop takes d6, and then this check. And after the move h3, white locks up the position, but still black is doing perfectly fine here. And it truly shows how amazing at chess Hikaru is to be able to find this move that doesn't come with such a concrete plan. Okay, let's continue with the actual game. So Boris did not take the knight and instead played the move d takes on c7. And here, notice that Hikaru's queen is hanging. But he ignores this. Why do you care about the queen? Instead, taking the rook. And the idea is if white takes the queen, then there's checkmate with g2. And this is such a beautiful concept. The bishop and pawn cornering the king, and all you need is one check with the pawn. And so Hikaru leaves his queen to be taken and attacks and threatens checkmate here. So white, of course, takes the knight, doesn't take the queen. And now you might think, okay, cool. Now maybe the queen should move, perhaps taking the pawn. No, Hikaru did not want to move the queen, still leaving it with the ability of being taken, and instead played the move g2. The king has to take, and now rook to g7. And now the king has to move, and now the move bishop to h3. Again, white can take this queen, but nope. If white takes the queen, there is indeed a checkmate with bishop to g2. And the bishop is basically acting like that pawn. And the rook is defending it instead of the knight, but the idea is the same. You're giving a check, and these two pieces cornering the king, it is checkmate. And so Hikaru left his queen out to be taken for some nice amounts of moves, but of course you couldn't take the queen. So bishop f1 was played to try to stop this bishop g2, of course, and now the move queen to d3, which is just incredible. Of course, you can't take the queen because of checkmate. You're dragging the bishop away from its important post here. And if you take the bishop, then there's also checkmate into like this. And so by giving the queen, putting the queen again for, I believe, maybe a 5th time now in a row, putting the queen in harm's way, Hikaru is still in a beautiful and dominating position here, and it's very, very difficult to play this as white. In fact, white is just completely losing here. So a really beautiful a really beautiful series of moves, and actually one of the reasons that this works is that, in all these times where white could have taken the queen, so after this move knight takes rook, white couldn't take the queen because it doesn't come with check. And why does it not come with check? Because of this bishop here, that Hikaru moved his rook up and then put his bishop here all those moves ago. That bishop is actually becoming an incredibly important piece. So I just want to point that out. But let's get back to the game. So rook takes, queen takes, and now check, check. The bishop comes to h3, queen to d3, still an incredible move. And now Boris played the best move, but truly there's nothing good here for white. Knight to e5. attacking the queen, defending this pawn, stopping the queen from taking it. And you might think, okay, you know what? We had some fun. Let's move the queen to safety. Hikaru doesn't agree. Bishop takes f1 with the idea that, again, if you take the queen, there's still that same checkmate. And this is the danger of having the king stuck in a corner. So make sure you always give your king some breathing room, because this is just so brutal here. So he gives away his queen for a sixth time now. And then finally, after queen takes, the queen takes the knight here. And finally, his queen is finally safe here. And he is just in a dominating position. The game continued with rook to c1, with the idea that after queen takes knight, white will promote and take the rook. But even with that nice exchange for white, it's just completely losing because, in this position, Boris resigned. But the point is, if the rook moves, you'll take the pawn, and these two pawns are basically unstoppable, and black will completely win here. So this is definitely a beautiful game. You're putting the queen in a position where it can be taken for 6 moves in a row. Maybe that's not exactly accurate because this was a check, so it's not possible to take the queen, but still such a beautiful game with this queen to d3 idea. It's phenomenal. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I truly like this game, and let me know down below what you thought of this game. If you enjoyed this video and want more videos like these, then subscribe and hit that thumbs up, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.